Hello and welcome to another episode of NRL Rewind, and we are finally there. We're finally into the final series for 2011. Only 6 teams remaining, of course, with the Cowboys and the Newcastle Knights being eliminated this weekend. A lot to get through in this episode. Rant of the Week is going to be a beauty this week, but let's get it all started as usual with the weekly wrap. The finals kicked off with a hotly anticipated battle of two sides in contrasting form, as the West Tigers took 8 straight wins into the 4th versus 5th clash with the Dragons, who'd lost 5 of their last 7 regular season games. The Tigers were indeed tipped to leave the Dragons sweating on other results to remain in contention, but the first half made a total mockery of the form guide. The defending premiers knuckled down to the grafting, methodical style of play that had proved so successful in the past, while the Tigers seemed too keen to play sideways and find a big play on each tackle. The result was one of the uglier displays in recent memory from the Tigers, and a 12-6 lead to the Dragons, thanks to a barge over from Mitch Rain and some nice work from Jamie Soward setting up a flying Jason Nightingale. Wests must have been laughing at the fact they could play so badly and only be 6 points down at the break, thanks mainly to an outrageous piece of luck from Benji Marshall after he managed to regather a failed attempt to kick long and produced a mesmerising sidestep to beat Darius Boyd. Normal service resumed after the break, and the Tigers suddenly had everything clicking again, with the exception of the hopelessly malfunctioning left edge of Matt Utai and Lottie Takiri. Realising this, West went right and did so with great effect, scoring 3 tries and keeping the Dragons scoreless to complete a dominant half and their 9th win on the trot. In what turned out to be yet another worrying fade-out, the Dragons' attack became predictable and they never looked like winning once they surrendered the lead. Wayne Bennett must have been particularly dismayed at the number of errors that crept into their game as the clock became a factor. The Do It for Lockyer campaign has rolled on in grand style for the Broncos, who managed to overcome a bad record as the 3rd place team in their first final, while sending outgoing Warriors coach Ivan Cleary a lighter shade of grey. In what was the best 80-minute performance of any team this week, Brisbane took advantage of every opportunity the Warriors presented, and they were plentiful to say the least. Manu Vatuvei returned from injury but must have wished he'd taken another week off. The enigmatic winger had a shocker, committing 5 errors, but he was anything but alone. The Warriors lacked in almost every department, prompting Ivan Cleary to admit that this was the first time he felt like apologising to their fans after a loss. Warriors centre Joel Moon won't be available for their shot at redemption against the Tigers next week after suffering a dislocated ankle. The beneficiary of his misfortune will be Krishnan Inu, who will form a dangerous rocks or diamonds combination with Manu Vatuvei. An illustration of one of the McIntyre system's biggest flaws, the Broncos' impressive win sees them progress to a sudden death match against the Dragons, but this didn't seem to faze Darren Lockyer, who warned that Brisbane still had plenty of improvement for the weeks to come. Perhaps the biggest indication of the Broncos' level of teamwork was the fact they had 7 individual scorers in the 40-10 rout. If Friday night was a story of contrasting halves, then the 2nd versus 7th clash of Manly and North Queensland successfully carried that concept to a new extreme. Knowing that they needed to win to prolong their season, the Cowboys came out firing and dominated both possession and field position in the first half. Only the Sea Eagles' staunch goal line defence prevented the scoreline from blowing out. The score itself didn't reflect the fact that these two sides boasted the best attacking records during the regular season, with only Willie Tonga managing to make it in for a try and 2 goals from Jonathan Thurston giving the Cowboys an 8-0 lead at half-time. Whatever Des Hasler said at half-time, he'll be hoping someone recorded it. Manly were a completely different side from the 41st minute and would not only win the match but shatter the record books by scoring 42 unanswered points in the second half shellacking. The remarkable awakening from the Sea Eagles ended North Queensland's season in devastating style, with senior players Brent Tate and Jonathan Thurston close to speechless when asked about the 7th try assault began at the 48th minute. Man of the match Tony Williams continued his barnstorming form of recent weeks. The off-contract utility finally seems to become aware of his size and ability to do some serious damage as a forward. Manly will do well to retain his services as a host of clubs led by the Cronulla Sharks are reportedly after his signature. It wasn't pretty and struggled to be entertaining at times, but the Melbourne Storm have ended Newcastle's season and advanced to the third week of the finals with an 18-8 victory. The Storm suffered a setback in the warm-up, with bench utility Rory Kostjason injuring a hamstring, but it is yet to be determined if he'll miss any further action. In what looked to be a case of a far superior team slipping to the level of their opposition, the Storm lacked polish and concentration in the second half after cruising to half-time 16-0 up. Despite 2 late tries from the Knights, the match was never out of hand for Melbourne, who will face either the West Tigers or New Zealand Warriors for a place in the grand final. The loss also brought the curtain down on the career of former New South Wales and Australian representative Adam McDougall, who retires after 195 games with the Roosters, Knights and Rabbitohs. There was more excitement and crowd passion on display before the match than during it, with the crowd unanimously booing NRL CEO David Gallop during the presentation of the JJ Gilton and Shield to Storm captain Cameron Smith. Gallop's remarks earlier today, likening the crowd's motivation to that of a group of terrorists, is not likely to improve his perception amongst fans anytime soon. For the Spectrum this week, I'm giving the best and worst performance of the week to the same team, the Manly Sea Eagles. Their first half against the North Queensland Cowboys was appalling. There isn't a better word to describe how they played that first half. It was lacking in intensity, they lacked communication, they lacked any kind of imagination or initiative in attack. They turned up as though this was supposed to be a walk in the park and that they'd already thought about how they were going to spend their week off. In complete contrast to that was the second half. I don't know what Des Hasler said, but Manly then came out and produced the best, at least statistically, finals half of football of all time. 42 points and 7 tries to nil, which eclipses the old record set by Newtown against St George in 1944 of 40 points to nil. It was the perfect half of football. They scored those 42 points in 32 minutes, and once they got on a roll, it looked, I'm sure for a lot of opposition supporters, scary. The McIntyre system remains to me the most frustrating thing about this time of year. I can't for the life of me work out why the NRL are persisting with it. The AFL gave it up in 1999 in favour of a much better system, and with the NRL watching this happen and watching how successful it's been for the last 12 years in the AFL, why haven't they said, you know what, we might follow suit? Is it a pride thing? I don't know. All I know is that it's going to take a year when all of the bottom teams win their qualifying finals, which would of course mean that teams 3 and 4 are eliminated in week 1, for there to be any serious thought put into replacing the McIntyre system. I don't think it should ever come to something like that, or need to come to something like that. The system currently used by the AFL is absolutely perfect. It is the perfect way to run a top 8 final system. It adequately rewards teams that finish in the top 4, because you know going into the finals that, for one thing, your first final you have no chance of being eliminated. Alright, that's not a possibility. And if you don't happen to win that first final, you're guaranteed to host a final in the second week. So if you finish in the top 6, you know you're entitled to at least 1 home final. If you finish in the top 2, you know that you're entitled to 2 home finals. None of this needing to wait on other results to determine which sides are eliminated. You're either playing in a qualifying final or an elimination final. It's better for the fans, it's better for the players, it produces better matches, it's an easier system to follow. I don't understand why the NRL haven't looked at that and gone, you know, it's the better way. It's the way to better promote and better execute the running of our product. I mean, it frustrates me to no end that it happens time and time again when you compare the AFL and NRL. The NRL is working with a far superior product and doing its level best at times to completely mismanage it. The AFL, in contrast to that, the product probably not as appealing, or at least to me and to fans like me, not as appealing, but infinitely better run as a product, marketed as a product. And using the best finals system available must surely be part of making the game, making the product the best it can be. The NRL are not doing that at the moment with the McIntyre system. Looking ahead to next week, we have only the 2 matches. West Tigers will host the New Zealand Warriors, and the Brisbane Broncos will host the St George Illawarra Dragons. On form, you'd say these are going to be easy wins to the Broncos and the Tigers, and I certainly think that'll be the case with the Broncos. I can't see the Dragons recovering from their recent form, which looks too well ingrained to see an overnight reversal. I think the Broncos will be the first team through. They'll face Manly in the major semi-final. As far as Melbourne's opponent, that one, I don't think we'll see that one decided in 80 minutes. So my prediction for this week is that the match between the West Tigers and the New Zealand Warriors will go to Golden Point. Who'll win? On the strength of their field goal kickers, I'll go with the West Tigers. And that wraps it up for this Week 1 Finals edition of NRL Rewind. As always, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to rate this video thumbs up and subscribe. Also, don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter. And I will see you next week with a wrap-up of Week 2 of the 2011 Finals series. See you then.